Welcome back, Sebastian here. Today's Monday, day after the end of the 2023 Formula One season. So today I want to review my preseason predictions, which I'll link up above, as well as the results of my race model predictions that I made, and I'll link that up above as well. So first, taking a look at my personal predictions. In the Drivers' Championship, my prediction was Verstappen, Hamilton, Russell, Leclerc, Perez, Sainz, Alonso, Ocon, Gasly, Norris, Bottas, Stroll, Hulkenberg, Piastri, Magnussen, Zhou, De Vries, Tsunoda, Albon, and Sargent. Now, taking a look at the big differences between what I thought and what actually happened. Drivers' champion Verstappen, that was the only position I think I actually got correct. Perez P2. I think the Red Bull was a lot more dominant than a lot of us expected going after preseason testing. So yeah, full disclosure, I made these predictions after preseason testing, but before the first race of the season in Bahrain. I kind of knew the Red Bull was quite strong, but I figured it would be a closer fight. And honestly, if you look at just the second half of this past season, Perez doesn't finish second place, just taking the second half of the season. That's kind of what I figured the whole season would be like. But Perez did bag enough points in the first half of the year to stay in P2. Hamilton P3 versus P2, not a big difference, but the Mercedes were definitely weaker than I thought they would be. Now we have Alonso P4. I had Alonso P7 in my predictions. I knew that Aston Martin looked very good in preseason testing, but I wasn't completely sold on them. I kind of figured that they would be at the front of the fight between themselves, Alpine and McLaren, but I didn't really see them, leaping up and fighting with the Ferrari or the Mercedes, and that's kind of where I think a lot of people were proven wrong. So the fact that Alonso fourth place really shows that that jump was quite a bit bigger than expected. Leclerc P5, I predicted P4, not a whole lot of difference there. Maybe a little bit worse than expected, but still not a big difference there. P6 Norris, I predicted Norris in P10, and for me, we knew after preseason testing they had an absolutely disastrous preseason testing. And some people were even talking about them as, the 10th fastest team. And while I didn't have any doubt that they would improve, I think I really underestimated the extent to which they would improve. So the fact that Norris is 6, and I'll talk about Piastri a bit later, but the fact that Norris was able to recover to 6 after being so slow the first third of the season is a real testament to the upgrades that McLaren brought to the team. Sainz P7, I predicted P6, not a big difference there. Russell P8 I think is a big one. So I predicted P3 for Russell. I honestly thought Russell would be a lot closer to Hamilton this year. I did predict Hamilton ahead of Russell, but I thought Russell would be much closer to Hamilton on points after a pretty good showing that he had in his first year at Mercedes. So a bit disappointed by Russell this past year. A couple of just very scrappy weekends and, just weekends where he'd have a couple of mistakes that would cost him quite a few points. Number 9, Oscar Piastri, I predicted P14, similar to what I said about Norris. I didn't think that McLaren would end up being as good as they were. And I think Piastri kind of turned out to be a revelation of sorts, pretty much as good as we expected, as we had hoped, from a driver who won F3 and F2 in their rookie season. Number 10, Stroll, I predicted P12. So a bit of an improvement from where I predicted, but when you look at Alonso going from P7 to P4, you would have hoped for a bit more from Stroll, especially since he's quite an experienced driver now, and I do think it would be reasonable to expect him to have finished ahead of Piastri. Then we get to 11 and 12, Gasly and Ocon. I predicted 8th and 9th, but in the reverse order, so that's, let's see, that is, yes, the first prediction I got wrong in terms of teammates head-to-head, but, when we look at the points, it was very, very close. So for Alpine, I kind of expected them to be in that fight with Aston and McLaren. They were basically in no man's land the entire season, basically 6th place, slam dunk 6th place ever since McLaren got those upgrades. 13th Albon, I predicted 19th. I think Williams was much better than we expected. They had a decent preseason testing. I do remember, but I was not so optimistic because they were so much slower than everyone else at the end of last year. But, basically thanks to, I think, Alfa Romeo and Haas kind of slipping down quite a bit, they were kind of able to, and Albon, I think, was really able to shine, and he gets P13. Then we get Tsunoda P14, I predict P18. I think Tsunoda made some really good steps as a driver throughout the season. I think thanks to the upgrades that AlphaTauri had late in the season, he was able to, get quite a few points in the last third of the season. Otherwise, he could have easily finished down in P16, P17. P15 Bottas, I predicted a P11. I think Alfa Romeo as a whole were a bit of a disappointment this year. I kind of figured they would take a step backwards after how poorly their 2022 season progressed. They started 2022 very well, but as the season went along, they got kind of worse and worse and worse, and they barely hung on to P6 by the end. So I had pretty low expectations coming into this year, but I still figured, they should be all right. Bottas is a pretty good driver, but no, it's P15 for Bottas. Then we get to Hulkenberg 16. I had him 13th. Yeah, I had him 13th. So again, similar to Alfa Romeo, a bit disappointing. And of course, with the Haas race pace, it was pretty much a disaster the whole season. They were very, very lucky to get points when they did. Then we get to Ricciardo, of course. He was not an F1 driver when I did my prediction, so can't really speak a whole lot about him. 18th, Zhou. Let's say I predicted 16. A little bit worse, but that kind of tracks with Alfa Romeo not being as good. 19th, Magnussen, I predicted P15 again, similar to Hulkenberg. 20th, Lawson wasn't an F1 driver when we started this, when I did my predictions. 21st, Sargent, who somehow finishes lower than the 20th I predicted for him. For Sargent, I think a bit of a tough year, really, really tough year. I kind of expected him to struggle as he was quite raw for a rookie, similar to Tsunoda. But I did expect a little bit more out of him and a little bit more progress towards the second half of the season. I'll be talking about that a bit more in my review of Williams when I eventually get around to it, I think next week or the week after. Then we get to 22, De Vries. Of course, I predicted De Vries ahead of Tsunoda. He ended up finishing 22nd in the championship. I think De Vries was a disappointment. I think I had decently high expectations for him. I obviously had him ahead of Tsunoda. I figured with his many years of experience in motorsport, doing Formula E, Formula 2, and I believe he was doing WEC as well before, I figured that experience combined with his pretty good performance at Monza meant that he would be able to come in and hit the ground running, and that just isn't what happened. He struggled quite a bit, particularly in the races, which is something that was definitely not his strong point in Formula 2. So that's predictions. I think I got 8 out of the 10 teammate battles right. The only ones I got wrong were Gasly and Ocon, which was very, very close, and De Vries and Tsunoda. Sorry, still recovering. Now, on to the race model prediction. So just to explain what these prediction numbers are. So I have my race model that I basically built that has all years from 2008 all the way till 2023. And it basically has a score for each driver, and using those scores, comparing those scores, you get kind of a delta, a difference, and then taking that and you can basically calculate based on how many points, how many constructors points a team gets, what percentage each driver should get. Of course, for the higher ranked teams like your Red Bulls, your Mercedes, those percentages those percentages are going to be closer to 50% because the number is higher. For the teams towards the bottom, your Haas's, your Alfa Romeos, those percentages are going to be tracked closer towards the pole, so 100 and 0% as points become more and more scarce. So starting with Red Bull, Verstappen 575 points, Perez 285. So the model predicted 525, 325 split. So it did, of course, predictably correct Verstappen over Perez. The gap was a bit bigger than the model expected, which is honestly a bit of a surprise. Next we get to Mercedes, Hamilton 234, Russell 175. The model predicted 215 for Russell, 194 for Hamilton. And this was based on Russell's very strong first year against Hamilton. Of course, this did not happen. Hamilton beat Russell in points, but it's interesting that, I think it's just an interesting note. And I think going into next year, almost certainly the model will be in favor of Hamilton. And even though I haven't made it yet, just based on it, because I know how the model works, I'm pretty confident that Russell will be predicted to be ahead of, or Hamilton will be predicted to be above Russell next year. Then we get to Ferrari. Leclerc 206, Sainz 200. The model predicted 212 for Leclerc and 194 for Sainz. So I did get that correct. It was very, very close. It basically came down to Abu Dhabi. Of course, the margin was a bit closer than was expected as well. Then we get to McLaren. Norris 205, Piastri 97. Model predicted 182 and 120. And of course, the 3 blue dots are for the 3 rookies. So for these drivers, didn't have any data, so I basically had to make up a number to put into the model to give a ratio for Piastri coming in as a double, as basically a rookie F2 champion. I think the expectations were pretty high. He did, based on what the number that I did and I ended up choosing, he did fall short of those expectations, but still Norris is a very, very good driver, so it's not really anything to be ashamed of. Then we get to Aston Martin, Alonso 206, Stroll 74. And I remember going into the season, I looked at what the model had predicted, and I thought, that seems a bit harsh. It seems like quite a big difference. And it turns out that what we actually got was bigger than that difference. So 190 for Alonso, 90 for Stroll. Then we get into Then we get to Alpine, Gasly 62, Ocon 58. The model predicted 45 for Gasly, 75 for Ocon. So this was another one that the model got wrong. And basically the reason that it predicts Ocon to be ahead of Gasly is because Gasly, prior to this season, a lot of his teammate relationships are within the Red Bull family, because a lot of them have teammates, or mutual teammates with each other. Those adults kind of tend to be they tend to be more important. And Gasly's half season against Verstappen basically absolutely sinks his score overall, even though he did very well against Kvyat and Tsunoda, for example. So that is why Gasly was predicted to be worse than Ocon. I think coming out of this year, I think it'll be much, much closer, and it'll be interesting to see what the model predicts for next year. Then we get to Williams, Albon 27, Sargent 1. The model predicted 21 and 7. 21 for Albon and 7 for Sargent. So again, this is one where this is one where I think Albon did quite well, and I think Sargent underperformed the expectations that we had. But of course, another rookie, so I was basically just making numbers up to try to figure out what I thought would be reasonable. Then we get to AlphaTauri. This one's kind of an absolute mess. We know in reality what happened is that we had Tsunoda and De Vries for 10 races. Tsunoda, I believe, got 2 points, De Vries 0, and then De Vries was dropped for Ricciardo, who then, after 2 races, promptly broke his wrist in free practice. And then we had Lawson for 5 races, and we then had Ricciardo for the last 5 races of the season. So in terms of modeling, it's a complete mess, but I'm not even going to try to explain or try to parse all the numbers out for each of the pairings. If they had completed the full season, the model would have predicted 18 for De Vries, 7 for Tsunoda. That's one that the model clearly got wrong. Basically, similar to Gasly, Tsunoda's only teammate in F1 up to this point has been Gasly, which is why he was rated very, very poorly. So I couldn't, in good conscience, again, with De Vries being a rookie, just arbitrarily give him a number worse than Tsunoda just for the sake of it. But still, that's what happens when you have very, very little data. Then we have Bottas and Zhou. We have Bottas 10 points, Zhou 6 points. The model predicted 14 for Bottas, 2 for Zhou. Zhou had a pretty weak rookie season. He improved quite a bit this year. So that's, of course, something that will be taken into account next year. Then we get to Haas. This was, I think, one of the more interesting ones, given that Hülkenberg was returning after 3 years on the sidelines, basically. So this was definitely one that I think there was a decent amount of interest for me as to which way the battle would go. Hülkenberg 9 points, Magnussen 3 points, and the model predicted 8 for Hülkenberg, 4 for Magnussen. So actually very, very close to what ended up happening. So overall, the model got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 out of 10 correct, which is not terrible. One of the ones that got wrong was a rookie, one of the rookie ones, and then of course Gasly, Ocon very, very close. Hamilton, Russell a bit less close. And then for myself, I think I was 8 out of 10. So again, pretty close as well. So that's all for my review of my predictions from preseason, as well as the results for my race model predictions, and seeing how those two fare to the season that we actually got. So of course, thank you so much for watching. I'll be out with another video in a couple days, which will be my expected points model. So that's something I'm quite excited, looking forward to. I've been working on it for most of the season. So yeah, that will be, I think, on Thursday, Friday or so. So thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.